the one thing everyone sort of knows, so to speak, about the Mongol Empire is, Genghis Khan or Genghis Khan, and the
Yeah,
almost universal image people have is, marauding armies on horseback, seeking world
yeah.
domination. And that is absolutely not the story you tell in your book.
Yes.
Who were the Horde, the Mongols, and then specifically the Horde? Who were they? What were they really like? Because your book
Yeah,
really flips the script, I guess, on who
that
they were really
that's
like.
yeah, that was my idea. That was really important. So first, the interesting thing is I didn't start with this preconceived idea that, oh, I'm going to revise the whole story. This just what I was in seeing in my sources, like
Mhm.
written sources, archaeology. I try to use everything, and I realized they're much more than just war, and there are no like the idea that they destroyed the entire population and destroy completely cities is, but this is not directly my work, but my colleagues in archaeology, they all say no, they destroyed some of them and the war happened, but the level of destruction is was amplified in different sources for a number of reasons. So my point, I think, was also, it's coming from discussion with my student, why would they go out of what is basically Mongolia today, where the Mongols lived in the 12th century with Genghis Khan, and why they renegotiate their relationship with their neighbors, how this whole process of the conquest, how to describe it, up, seeing what we see in the sources. And I discovered that there was no grand plan of conquering the world or things like this, that they wanted to trade differently. They wanted to be recognized as, leaders among nomads first. So they were very much after nomads, much more than after sedentary people. So the idea that, these nomads are raiding cities, they want the wealth of the cities. This is just, a late construction. So that's one aspect. The other interesting aspect that I could see in my sources is how after the war of the conquest, they completely transformed Central Eurasia, and how they transform the trade connections, all the rules of exchange also among nomads with what is China today. Of course, the Russian principalities were in, but also with Europe, especially Northern Europe. So I was extremely interested in describing this, analyzing it, and also I realized that I heard before, well, okay, the Mongol, they open up, but thanks to the foreign traders, like Italian traders, really the rules of exchange became modern in a way. But actually, you can see that no, Mongols were behind all those changes, that they were super conscious of what they were doing and that they themselves changed the rules.
Mm. In fact, you describe them as, I think the term you use is expert administrators, or I mean, you could say like skillful politicians, I guess, rather than
Yeah.
these sort of armies.
Yeah,
And that
it's
really
true.
struck me, that it was about their political. I don't know, political genius is too big a term, but they're very skillful diplomats and um,
Yeah.
governors.
Yeah, they were very good at recruiting the good person for the good position. Like, for instance, when they want administrators, they would go for traders
Mm.
because traders, they speak usually different languages. Usually they know how to write and they can use different scripts, and they know how to count. And counting is key, if you want to organize what they're going to do, like use huge taxation system, uh, build on what people produced, and there are all those communities producing, agriculture in agri some are working on agriculture, others are herders, you have the traders, you have a lot of craftsmen, also religious people who have their own statues. So this very complex organization, they were able to run it for like 2 centuries and even 3 centuries when you look at the western part of the Mongol Empire. So it's extremely interesting, I think, because we have documents, we have coins, we have many things that can help us to understand how they manage this diversity. I think for us today, it's really impressive. We are so monolith. I mean, States is a monolith today, and look at their state. It was so, it was like a patchwork, but with good combination. So that's what I wanted to show.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess if Genghis Khan is, or Han is the, the best known Mongol leader, perhaps for most people, the only sort of known Mongol leader. You sort of introduce him in the book, but you introduce him in a kind of a when he's first introduced in the book, it's in a slightly different way because you present him talking to this sort of Taoist priest, I guess. Is that the right term?
Or Taoist monk. Yeah, absolutely. Taoist monk. And I wanted to show that Genghis Khan actually was got a lot of ideas about how to deal with the new subject in his newborn empire. And that how he was so interested in negotiation, how he managed diplomacy, and how also he managed, that's what I just said about taxation and religious diversity, to give some religious elites some sort of freedom to practice their own religion and also to organize their own community, not to pay taxes, and not to go to war, no conscription for religious clergies, monk, priest. This is important because it explains how some of his new subjects, Muslim, Taoist, Buddhist, and Christian, agreed to be ruled by the Mongols because actually it was a fair deal for them. And I also wanted to show that okay, this is what happened from the Mongol side, but look at the subject also side, and why would they accept, seeing that the Mongols are just a few men? If you compare, like, if the demographic balance, it's no good for the Mongol, so they cannot rely only on violence, force, and coercion. They have to convince people that the system is good, that the Mongol order is a good order, and then this is one key aspect, the way they deal with these religious communities since the time of Genghis Khan. That's what I wanted to show. Although also the important, I think I wanted to show is that it's not only Genghis Khan's work. It's like, I like very much the collective aspects, which I discovered also in my sources. He's so famous, he's a hero. So we always focus on him, but it's not just him. It's like the whole family, it's the people, the friends around him, plus of course all the people they hired, and his administrators, all the people around the one we call Mongol, actually.
Yeah, I mean, could you say a bit more about that? Because that's a big theme of the work too, isn't it? I mean, part of being skillful politicians was the fact that they didn't just say it's my way or the highway. They sort of worked as a collective, and it was they had sort of quite strong sort of political institutions of sort of collective decision making sort of institutions. If I read the book correctly,
they do. So the kind of question I had when I was start working on this was, okay, do you have a ruler? So it's Genghis Khan. After him, it will be a son, and there will be many successors in his own lineage. So we call them Khan or Khan. And how they manage to govern their empire, how they manage with the different elite, nomadic elite, living far away, seeing that the empire is so big because it covered at the end of the 13th century, it covered most of Eurasia. So he had the Khan had the council, so a number of people around him helping him in kind of everyday governing. That's one thing. But the other interesting thing is they have what we call the Kuriltai or Khurilte, a big assembly. And this big assembly will convene we think twice a year, at least once a year, but sometimes twice a year. Mostly probably at the spring season. And they, during this moment, so nomads would come from everywhere in the empire. All the important nomadic families come, not only men, a lot of women too, all the important nomadic lineage, Mongol nomadic lineage. So some would come from 1,000 kilometers away, like from Western Russia to Mongolia. And they would organize their discussion, and they really say that at the moment when decisions are taken, war, peace, big marriage, trade, big trade contract, trial, if you need, a special trial, also that could be the moment. This is a moment for taxation organization and things like this. So, and they're really clear on the fact that they really need these face-to-face moments. So although they are so far away, there's a moment they really have to be together, and this it's not just one day assembly. It lasts usually for weeks. And interestingly, so it's at the spring season probably, or summertime. And it's the moment when the Mongols stop conquering, stop fighting, so just sit and talk. And I think this seasonal thing is super interesting. The fact that in summertime or springtime, it's a moment everything stops, and it makes sense when you're herders, because you have your herds, you have the lactation time and everything. So the animals need to rest, and they really follow the rhythm of the animal in that sense. So, and winter is time for like a trade everywhere, war if necessary, moving. It's traveling time. It's winter. And when you know how cold the winter can be still today, in northern, Eurasia, this is crazy. You imagine this is very cold winter, and the Westerners and the Muslim also from the Middle East were super surprised by this organization. And this explains a little bit, it's part of their success during the conquest, because in Latin Europe, you don't do war during winter. In the Russian principalities, you don't do war during winter. So they were really puzzled, and that's really the Mongol rhythm. That's my student always say, well, but it's very hard to move with all the animals during winter with the snow, how they did it. But no, in fact, we have to think about Eurasia and all those big river valleys and all of those frozen rivers during winter, and that's the best moment because they are frozen. So it's like a highway. You can put the carts, you can put, you can have the camels, and you can walk fast and cross Eurasia. That's the only way, in fact. So,
I think I heard you in an interview say how you traveled to various places within what used to be the Horde's territories, just to sort of get a feel for, well, how would you move around this sort of territory as well?
I think it's very important although I'm a historian, for it's Middle Ages, so we can see, everything should happen now in the archives, which is true. I mean, you have to go to the archives when you're a historian, but you also have to see the places you describe. You have to understand also the geography by seeing it. We know some areas have changed, of course, but still, it gives you an idea. It gives you an idea of how a distance on a map look like a short, simple simple journey, and you have to walk, and then you see, oh wow, there are those hills. In fact, it's super dry. There's a lot of a wind in this area, and in fact, walking takes forever. So in a map, it looks like nothing. So it gives you really a different perception of the landscape. And I always say to my students, landscape is a source for us too. We have to go, and also, of course, we have to visit our archaeologists working on different sites and monuments, and as much as possible, where to see them.
Going back to the story, I guess the story of the Horde, like in I guess the popular kind of histories of the Mongol Empire, the sort of story ends kind of with Genghis Khan, really, and you really sort of take it all from there. What's the broad, and I guess people are used to kind of rise and fall of empire type stories, and you tell us sort of a different, it's a bit of like a chameleon. It keeps sort of changing. The nature of the Horde state sort of adapts and changes over time. So how would you describe the sort of story arc from
Yeah.
Genghis
Yeah,
Khan
that
to the end point.
yeah. Yeah, that's also something very interesting when you work on those nomadic empires and organization. You see how much they are able to adapt themselves and change. So the horde so my focus in my book is really the western part of the Mongol Empire. So it means people nomads coming in the early 13th century, first half of the 13th century, coming from Mongolia towards Eastern Europe and basically having their headquarters and centers around in the lower Volga today, which is like near maybe the city of Astrakhan,
Mm-hmm.
in this area. But it's remaining nomads, so seasonal movements, mobility, and but also leaving their home native region, right? And although we have this idea of this big step, well, no, there are different kind of steps, and it's different. If you go now today, you can travel to Mongolia, enjoy there the steppe, which can be very different if it's central or if near the Gobi or in the north. And then if you go to southern Russia, you'll see another type of steppes and another type of landscape. So it's flat basically. So, but still they had to adapt to live there. It's not because they were the new master that it was easy to adapt. So I was interested to see how they managed to, first of all, how they really sort of develop so they have tents, nomads with big round tents we call ger in Mongolian today, or yurt in Turkish language. And these tents, they would put them on cards, and they would roll, like, push the cart and use the animals, mainly probably oxen and camels, sometimes horses, to pull these big cart tents, or cards with tent on them, and it's because it's very flat, so they can move like this, and they would not dismantle the tents. They would just take it and put it on the ground when they need to stop. So I start working on how they move, and I realized they move very slowly with all the families, with the animals, with the craftsmen. Everybody move. No, it's so what we call a horde today is not it's not appropriate to what it was at that time, because it's not a bunch of excited warrior. It's all the nomadic people were walking together rather slowly along the river with the carts, the animal, the tent, lot of boxes. They carry a lot of things also. Women are in charge with conducting, all this. And we have description on how they manage to cross rivers, how they move, when they decide to move from a camp to another. Yeah, so that's first a very interesting way to adapt to a new, completely new landscape. And then also they adapt to the relationship with their sedentary subject. They're mostly the Russians in this area, but there were others, Armenians also, Italians, Venetians who came later, and how they decided not to walk on their ground because agriculture needs a special arrangement. So if nomads go there, it's bad. So they also have a vision of their territory, and they manage to have different territory. I mean, way of living in the same area. So I think it's extremely interesting. We don't have so many examples today of a state with basically two major different way of living, nomads on one side and sedentary people on the other side, living peacefully together. So I think it's interesting. And then they adapt because the world around them changed. And in Europe, things changed. The fragmentation of all these Christianities transformed. In Hungary, the neighbors, the Kingdom of Hungary become stronger. The rise of what we call Poland-Lithuania, rise of what we will call later Russia as well. So, and then the Ottoman arrived, blocked the Black Sea. How do they react to this? So I was super interested in seeing when there's a problem around them, also to how they organize themselves and how they fight back. or how they retreat, which is something I develop in my book, the ability to retreat, to withdraw when necessary. And that's how they survived, I think, in some areas until 16th century.
And you also, I guess, tell a story in the book about how what Europe and Europeans perhaps still perceive as the horde invading Europe to loot and dominate, etc., is really more about control of these different sort of nomad the different groups across the steppe of the different nomads. It's more about the sort of, I guess, internal politics of the steppe rather than envy of Europe